They think they know me. They look at me and see a quiet old woman who cleans up after herself and never asks for anything, but they forgot. Or maybe they never knew that I built everything they're standing on. My name is Celestine Dupree. I'm 64 years old. I live alone now in a two-bedroom apartment in Raleigh, North Carolina, and every single morning I wake up and pour my coffee and sit by that window and feel something I haven't felt in years. Peace. Real peace. Not the kind you settle for when you're too tired to fight anymore, the kind you earn. But before I tell you how I got here, you need to understand something about me. I am not a woman who acts out of anger. I act out of clarity. And there is a difference. Anger makes you loud. Clarity makes you dangerous. I raised my son, Kendrick, by myself. His father left when Kendrick was 3 years old, walked out on a Sunday morning like he was just going to get the paper and never came back. I had $42 in my purse and a lease that was up at the end of the month. I was 26 years old. I didn't have family close by. I had Kendrick and I had my own two hands, and I decided right then that those two things were going to be enough. I worked as a medical billing specialist for 22 years. I know that doesn't sound glamorous. It isn't. It means sitting in front of a computer screen, entering codes and chasing insurance companies and correcting other people's mistakes for 8 hours a day. But it paid steady. It had benefits. And the most important thing, it was mine. I showed up every single day. I built a reputation. I got promoted twice. I never called in sick unless I was genuinely sick, and even then I felt guilty about it. Kendrick grew up watching me work. He knew what I sacrificed. I didn't hide it from him. I wanted him to see it. I wanted him to understand that things do not fall from the sky, that somebody, somewhere, is always putting in the work that makes your life possible. And for a long time, I thought he understood. He was a good boy. Sweet, curious, worked hard in school. He won a partial scholarship to NC State. I covered the rest, every semester, writing checks from an account I'd been feeding for years, an account I'd started the month he started kindergarten. When he graduated with his engineering degree, I was in that auditorium, in my good blue dress, crying so hard my mascara left marks on my collar. I kept that collar. I never washed it out. That stain was a trophy to me. After graduation, he got a job with a construction firm in Charlotte. Good money. Benefits, a real future. I was so proud of him, I told everybody. The woman at my church, my co-workers, the cashier at Harris Teeter, didn't matter. I told anyone who would listen. He met Tanya about a year into his new job. I'll be honest with you. When I met Tanya for the first time, I didn't dislike her. She was pretty, confident, funny in a sharp kind of way. She came from a family with money. Her father was a real estate developer down in Myrtle Beach. Her mother had the kind of jewelry you don't get at the mall. They lived in a nice house in a gated community, and they were the kind of people who made sure you knew it without ever quite saying it out loud. I thought, okay, my son found someone ambitious, someone who pushes him. That's not a bad thing. The first sign was small. Kendrick stopped calling on Sundays. We'd had a standing Sunday call since he left for college. Nothing formal, just checking in, talking about whatever. It faded out over about 3 months after he and Tanya got serious. I didn't say anything. I told myself he was building a life. That's what you want for your children. You want them to build a life. The second sign was the Christmas visit. He came home, but she didn't. He said her family had a big tradition and she couldn't miss it. Fine. But the whole visit he seemed somewhere else, distracted. He kept checking his phone. We ate dinner and it felt like sitting across from a polite stranger who shared my son's face. By the time they got engaged, I had already quietly lowered my expectations. Not for him, for how much space I would take up in his world. They had a beautiful wedding. I want to be fair about that. It was held at a country club outside of Charlotte. Tanya's family paid for most of it. I offered to contribute, and Tanya's mother smiled at me in a way that meant no thank you and turned to talk to someone else. I wore a pale gold dress and sat in the front row and watched my son marry a woman who had already decided what kind of mother-in-law she wanted, and I was not it. After the wedding, things shifted fast. Kendrick had asked me, about 2 years before the wedding, if I could help him with a down payment on a house. He and Tanya had found a place in a nice neighborhood in Concord. 4 bedrooms, good school district, a yard. The asking price was $340,000. He needed $47,000 for a 20% down payment plus closing costs. I had it. I had more than it. 22 years of working, of not buying things I didn't need, of sending money to savings before I paid any other bill. I had built up a nest egg that would have surprised most people who looked at my life from the outside. I didn't drive a new car. I bought clothes at the end of season sales. I packed my lunch every day. But I had money, and most of it was sitting in accounts earning interest, waiting. I gave Kendrick the $47,000. My condition was simple. I asked him to put my name on the deed as co-owner, just as a formality, just until the mortgage was paid down enough that he could refinance and buy me out. He agreed without hesitation. We went to the attorney's office together. I signed the papers. My name went on the deed. Celestine Anne Dupree. It felt like putting my hands around something solid. I should tell you that Tanya was not at that attorney's office. She wasn't at the closing either. Kendrick said she had work. I didn't push. The first year of their marriage, I drove the 45 minutes to Concord once a month. I always called ahead. I always brought something, food, usually a pot of something I'd cooked, because I knew they were both working long hours and sometimes it's just nice to come home to a meal. For a while, Tanya was polite about it. She'd take the food, say thank you, make a little small talk. Then the small talk stopped. She started not being there when I visited. Then she started being there but staying upstairs. Then she started making it known, through small sharp comments and the way she moved through a room when I was in it, that my presence was a problem. One time I was in their kitchen warming up the soup I'd brought, and she came in and opened the refrigerator and stood there with her back to me for a long moment, and then said, without turning around, "Kendrick's mother, you really don't have to do this every month." I said, "I enjoy cooking for him." She said, "He's a grown man, he can feed himself." I picked up my pot and my dish towel and I said, "You're right, I'll head out." And I drove home and I cried in my car for the 45 minutes it took to get there. And then I washed my face and made a decision not to cry about it again. I told Kendrick about it the next week. He said, "Mom, Tanya just needs her space. She's private. It's not personal." I told him that it felt personal. He said, "Can you just try to give her some room? She's my wife. I need you to try." I tried. I went from once a month to once every 3 months. I stopped bringing food. I stopped calling Kendrick on his cell and started emailing instead, because Tanya had mentioned once that she didn't love him being on the phone at home. I bent myself into a smaller and smaller shape, and every time I bent, they expected me to bend further. There was one Thanksgiving, 3 years into their marriage. I had been invited. Kendrick had called himself to invite me, which I noticed because Tanya usually handled social things. I drove up, brought a pecan pie because Tanya's mother was bringing everything else, and I didn't want to step on anything. Tanya's whole family was there, her parents, her sister and brother-in-law, their children running around. It was a full house. I sat at the end of the table that seats 12, not near Kendrick. At the end, her father gave a toast. It was beautiful, warm, about family and legacy, and how proud he was of what Tanya had built. He mentioned Kendrick. He mentioned the house. He mentioned what a fine young man his son-in-law had become. He did not mention me. I ate my food. I talked to the children, who were sweet and didn't know any better. I helped clear the table. I drove home. And somewhere on I-85, I started running numbers in my head, just out of habit, just thinking. The situation finally broke open in April, about 4.5 years into their marriage. Kendrick had invited me to dinner at a restaurant in Charlotte. He said he had some news. I thought, grandchild. I was hoping for a grandchild. I wore my good earrings. Tanya was there when I arrived. So were 2 other couples, friends of theirs I'd met once or twice. Kendrick stood up and hugged me, and I sat down, and there was the energy in the air of something I didn't understand yet. After we ordered, Kendrick cleared his throat and said that they'd been talking about their long-term financial plans and that they wanted to refinance the house. He said the market had been good and their equity had grown and it made sense to restructure the mortgage. And then he said, And these are words I have turned over in my mind so many times since. He said, "We're going to need you to sign a quitclaim deed, just to remove your name from the title." I looked at him. I said, "To remove my name?" He said, "Yeah, just so the refinance goes through cleanly. You'll get your money back." I asked, "What money?" He said, "The down payment, the $47,000. We'll write you a check." Tanya was looking at her menu. I said, "Kendrick, I think we should talk about this privately." He said, "Mum, it's fine. These are our friends." "There's nothing," I said. "I'd prefer to do this privately." Tanya set down her menu and looked at me and said, in a voice that was very even and very deliberate, "Celestine, you've been holding that deed over our heads for 5 years. We'd like to just move on and have our own house. Is that so unreasonable?" I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't accused anyone of anything. I had simply asked to speak privately with my son, and she said I had been holding the deed over their heads. I felt something settle in me, not anger. That cold, clear thing I mentioned at the beginning. I said, "I understand." I picked up my water glass. I took a sip. I said, "I need to look over a few things. Let me get back to you." Kendrick looked relieved. He thought that meant yes. We ordered. We ate. The conversation moved on to other things. At the end of the evening in the parking lot, Kendrick hugged me and said, "Thanks, Mum. I know Tanya can be a lot. She's just protective of our home." I hugged him back. I said, "I love you, baby." Because I did. I do. That part never changed. I drove home and sat at my kitchen table until 2 in the morning, going through everything in a folder I had kept since the day we went to the attorney's office. The deed, the copy of the wire transfer, the signed agreement that had no repayment schedule because there had never been one, and one other document, a personal loan agreement I had drafted myself, had my attorney review, and had Kendrick sign before I ever transferred $1. I'd done it quietly, thinking it was just a formality, thinking I'd never need it. The kind of thing you do when you love someone, but you also spent 22 years in medical billing, and you understand that paperwork protects everyone. The loan agreement said $47,000 with no interest, repayable upon sale or transfer of property. My name on the deed meant I had the right to list the property for sale. A quitclaim deed removes your rights. It is not a negotiation. It is a surrender. I called my attorney the next morning. I am not going to tell you it was easy. I am not going to tell you it felt good. My son's name was on that house. His life was in that house. I sat with the decision for 3 weeks. I prayed on it. I talked to my pastor. I talked to my friend Glennis, who has known me since 1987, and who sat across from me at her kitchen table and said, "Celestine, what is it you're actually waiting for?" I didn't have an answer, and not having an answer told me everything. I reached out to a real estate agent. I got a comparative market analysis. The house had appreciated significantly. It was now worth $418,000. More than $78,000 in equity had built up above the original price. I gave Kendrick one more chance. I called him on a Thursday evening and told him I was not comfortable signing a quitclaim deed without a formal agreement in writing that detailed what I would receive and when. I told him I needed to feel secure. He put me on hold for about 2 minutes. When he came back, his voice was different, tighter. He said, "Tanya says if you're not going to cooperate, we're going to have to get an attorney involved." I said, "That is absolutely your right." He said, "Mom, don't do this." I said, "Kendrick, I love you. I am protecting myself." He said, "Kendrick, I love you. I am protecting myself." He said, "From your own son?" I didn't answer that. There wasn't anything to say. I called my attorney the next morning and told her to move forward. As co-owner, I had the legal right to force a partition sale. In North Carolina, when co-owners cannot agree on the use or sale of a property, either party can petition the court. My attorney filed the paperwork. Kendrick had 30 days to respond. He responded in 12, through his own attorney, with a letter that was formal and cold and called and legal language, an uncooperative co-tenant. I read that letter at my kitchen table. Uncooperative co-tenant. After 22 years of packing lunches, after $47,000, after every Sunday call and every pot of soup and every seat at the end of someone else's table, We settled before it went to court. That is usually how it goes. It is almost always cheaper to settle. Kendrick and Tanya agreed to buy me out at fair market value. My share, calculated from the deed percentage, came to $124,400. I received a wire transfer on a Tuesday afternoon in October. I sat at my computer and watched the confirmation number appear on my screen, and I did not feel triumphant. I felt tired. I felt the specific exhaustion of someone who has been bracing for something for a very long time and finally set it down. I took 2 weeks off work. I drove to Savannah, Georgia, which I'd always wanted to see. I walked along the waterfront. I ate shrimp and grits at a place with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu. I sat in Forsyth Park for an hour on a Tuesday morning and watched the fountain and thought about nothing at all. When I came home, there was a letter from Kendrick, a physical letter, handwritten. He said he was angry. He said he felt betrayed. He said he didn't understand how I could do something like that to my own family. He said Tanya had cried for 3 days. I held that letter for a long time. I thought about writing back. I thought about explaining. I thought about asking him if he remembered the Sunday calls, the graduation check, the attorney's office, the 45-minute drives with a pot of soup. I thought about asking him to really think about the word betrayal and who had used it correctly. I didn't write back. I set the letter in my folder with the deed and the wire transfer and the loan agreement, and I closed the folder and I put it on the shelf. 3 months later, I took an early retirement package that my employer had been offering to long-term staff. I was 63. I had more than enough saved. I found my apartment in Raleigh, close to Glennis, close to my church, 1 floor up, with a window that faces east. I did not tell Kendrick I was moving. He found out through someone at my old church who knew his aunt. He called me, finally, on a Sunday, the first Sunday call in years. I picked up. We talked for 20 minutes. It was not comfortable, but it was real, and there was something in his voice I recognized, something uncertain, something that was reaching back toward me without quite knowing how. I don't know if we will find our way back to each other. I think maybe we will, but only if it's built on something true, not on what I can give or what I'm willing to give up. Not on how small I'm willing to make myself to fit inside someone else's idea of what a mother should be. My name is Celestine Dupree. I spent 40 years making sure everyone around me was comfortable, was fed, was cared for, was standing on solid ground. I did not do it for gratitude. I did it because I loved them. But I also learned this. Loving someone and allowing them to diminish, you are not the same thing. They feel the same for a while. And then one day you're sitting at the end of a long table that has no room for you, watching someone else give a toast about a house your money helped buy, and you understand the difference. I poured my coffee this morning and sat by my east-facing window and watched the light come in, and I thought, not about Kendrick, not about Tanya, not about any of it. I thought about tomorrow, about what I might cook, about calling Glennis, about maybe taking that trip to New Orleans I've been putting off for 15 years. I thought about all the space I have now for my own life, and I smiled. I keep thinking about that folder, the one sitting on my shelf with the deed, the wire transfer, the loan agreement, all of it. I never planned to use most of those documents. I prepared them the way you buy insurance on something you love, hoping you never need it, knowing it's wise to have it anyway. That's not cynicism. That's what it looks like when you've lived long enough to understand that good intentions don't hold up in court. What happened between me and my son didn't happen overnight. That's the part people don't always see when they hear a story like this. There was no single villain moment. No one morning I woke up and decided to protect myself. It was years of small things. A chair at the end of a table, a Sunday call that stopped, a pot of soup left on a counter while someone stood with her back to me. Each thing alone was nothing. Together, they were a pattern, and I ignored the pattern for a long time because I didn't want to believe what it was telling me. That is the thing I most want to say clearly. I was not a victim of one bad moment. I was someone who kept choosing comfort over truth. I kept telling myself that love was enough to hold things together, that if I just bent a little more, gave a little more, asked for a little less, things would balance out. They didn't. They never do. Because when you teach people that you will always shrink to accommodate them, you don't earn their appreciation, you earn their expectation. The money was never really about the money. $47,000 is significant, yes, but what I was actually protecting when I called my attorney was something harder to quantify. It was the record of who I had been. 22 years of packed lunches and end-of-season sales and accounts I fed before I paid any other bill. If I had signed that quitclaim deed in silence, I wouldn't have just lost a legal interest in a property. I would have agreed on paper that none of it had mattered. I am not a confrontational person by nature. I want that understood. But I have learned, slowly and at real cost, that there is a difference between keeping the peace and disappearing into it. Kindness without boundaries is not a virtue. It's a slow erasure. And the people who benefit from your erasure will call it love, right up until the moment you stop. Kendrick is my son. I love him the same way I loved him the day he was born. That has not changed, and it will not change. But love does not require me to be a resource without feelings, a name on a deed with no voice. It does not require me to accept being called an uncooperative co-tenant by the child I put through college. There is a version of love that holds firm, that says, I will not shrink any further, not because I stopped caring, but because I care enough about both of us to stop pretending this is okay. What I hope, if there is anything worth taking from my story, is this. Pay attention to the pattern, not just the moment. Build the paperwork when things are good, because that is the only time people sign things honestly. And when someone asks you to quietly hand over the one thing that proves you were there, that proves you built something, sacrificed something, showed up, you are allowed to say no. You are allowed to say no and mean it, and not apologize for meaning it. I poured my coffee this morning and the light came through my east window, and I thought about New Orleans. I've been putting that trip off for 15 years. I think I'm finally ready to go.